Lebanon is currently occupying news headlines as the latest battleground for the prolonged Arab-Israeli conflict. Unfortunately for the Lebanese people, this is on the back of decades of sustained political and economic troubles. In order to better understand Lebanon's present woes, we have to delve into the complexities of its modern history. It is a country famous for its diversity, with people from various creeds converging to create a real melting pot. Sadly, this diversity has been the cause of some serious pain for the Lebanese, as the horrific trauma of the civil war still haunts the country. Starting off with its inception in the mid-19th century, in this video we will track the historical development of Lebanon as a nation-state ever since. We will see how the country's creation came about as a result of France's patronage of Lebanese Christians after an act of extreme sectarian violence. From there, we'll move on to its golden age in the 1960s, when its capital Beirut was referred to as the Paris of the East, before being bogged down in one of the region's deadliest civil wars. Finally ending the story with the rise of Hezbollah and its current domination of Lebanese politics. Syria had been under the control of the Ottomans ever since 1516, when Sultan Selim defeated the Mamluks of Egypt for supremacy over it. It's important to note that the Arabic term for Syria, Sham, was historically used to denote a region that roughly corresponds with the Levant. In the context of this video, I will be using the term Syria in its historical sense, and not necessarily the modern nation-state of Syria. Greater Syria, another term for it, included the modern nations of not only Syria, but Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and even parts of Turkey. Ottoman Syria was subdivided into a few different eyalets, or provinces. These provinces were renowned for their diversity and being home to various creeds, the major ones being Sunni and Shia Islam, Orthodox Christianity, Maronite Christianity, and the Druze. Within Syria, the Ottomans found it particularly difficult to enforce their authority over the Mount Lebanon area, which makes up the central part of modern-day Lebanon. The Sultan in Constantinople could only enact his will on the major cities. The countryside, however, was ruled by independently minded tribal chieftains who were given a great deal of autonomy, and in return they would collect taxes for the Ottomans. This system of tax farming, known as iqta, was widely used throughout Islamic history and draws parallels with feudalism. Mount Lebanon was ruled through the Ma'an family until the 17th century. Ruling from Shuf, they belonged to an Arab-speaking ethno-religious group known as the Druze. Their faith is an esoteric one which grew out of Ismaili Shi'ism in the 11th century. It is syncretic by nature, drawing inspiration from all three Abrahamic religions, but also from divergent sources such as ancient Greek philosophy. Having historically been viewed as heretics by many Orthodox Muslims, they faced persecution at various times, thus forcing them to seek secluded mountainous areas such as Mount Lebanon and Jabal al-Druz in modern-day southern Syria, the latter literally meaning Mountain of the Druze in Arabic. In 1697, the last Ma'an emir died without a clear heir. After this, the Shihab dynasty, related to the Ma'an by marriage, would take control of Mount Lebanon. They ruled in much of the same manner that the previous dynasty had. About halfway through their reign, however, these emirs converted from Sunni Islam to Maronite Catholicism. Whilst this did not immediately garner backlash from the Druze, over time this resulted in the increase of Maronite influence at the expense of the feudal Druze chieftains who saw a loss in their power and prestige. Just outside the Levant, the Ottomans were losing their grip on their empire. A new Egyptian industrial age was beginning under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Pasha that momentarily looked like it would spell the end of the Ottoman Empire. By the 1830s, Muhammad Ali's power extended beyond Egypt, adding Syria, Sudan, Crete, and the Hijaz to his realm. In Syria, he had a powerful ally in the shape of Emir Bashir Shihab II, who would dominate Mount Lebanon for almost 50 years. His reign would be incredibly consequential for the future of Druze-Maronite relations, because in the 1820s, he fell out with powerful Druze families whose initial support for him was vital to his rule. From this point on, Emir Bashir would increasingly rely upon his fellow Maronites as he put them in high-ranking administrative positions, as well as offering them feudal privileges that had previously been enjoyed by Druze chiefs. In addition, Emir Bashir's reign was consequential as it saw the emergence of a conflict between the feudal lords and the citizens of Mount Lebanon, especially amongst the Maronites. Ordinary peasants complained about the heavy taxes that would be levied against them by the Shihab ruling family, who were in turn pressured by Ottoman governors to provide them with the levies. Emir Bashir's fortunes were tied to Muhammad Ali's, so when the European powers saw that the balance of power was being affected by the Egyptian ruler's meteoric rise, they allied with the Sultan in Constantinople to put his rebellious semi-independent governor back in check. In 1840, Muhammad Ali was pushed back to Egypt and the Ottomans re-established their rule over Syria. In the process, Emir Bashir was exiled and replaced by his cousin. 2 years later, the Shihab family was deposed and Ottoman rule was instituted through the double Qaim Maqamat of Mount Lebanon, which was subdivided into the Druze segment in the south and the Maronite section in the north. This did little to stop the growing tensions between Maronites and Druze, as well as commoners and feudal lords. This issue was compounded as European powers took sides, with the French supporting the Maronites and the British aiding the Druze. To make matters worse, Sultan Abdul Majid issued a decree in 1856 as part of the Tanzimat that was known as the Imperial Reform Edict, which equalized all Ottoman citizens regardless of creed. Whilst the Maronites celebrated this, the Druze and Muslims felt hard done by due to the loss of their privileges. 2 years later, a Maronite named Tanyus Shahin would lead a movement of peasants that deposed their Christian nobility in Mount Lebanon and established their own republic in Keserwan. When this movement started attacking nearby Druze and Shia settlements, it would eventually light the fuse for the 1860 conflict. Ottoman authorities seemed powerless to contain escalating tensions. As a result, Druze nobles took matters into their own hands by mobilizing fighters and retaliating to Maronite attacks. This cycle of revenge killings was dragging Mount Lebanon into a civil war. The summer of 1860 would mark the beginning of this ethno-religious civil war, with late May being seen as the starting point. Armed mobs on both sides started attacking each other's villages. At first, the Maronites had the ascendancy due to their organization and the aggressiveness of the Keserwan Republic. But then the Druze, buoyed by the huge numbers of their fighters, turned the tide and went on the offensive. With decades of pent-up resentment built up, this war was filled to the brim with massacres on both sides. As many as 12,000 people lost their lives, with the majority of them being Maronites. The important Maronite stronghold of Zahle was stormed by Druze fighters and signaled a unanimous victory for the Druze in Mount Lebanon. The war soon spread to other parts of Syria where there were also mixed communities, including the Beqa Valley and the Galilee. Even though the Maronites had seemingly started this conflict, the 8,000 plus dead Christians provided France the grounds to intervene and further erode Ottoman imperial authority. To be fair, the Sultan in Constantinople did little to stop the fighting. But before European powers could arbitrate, more massacres would take place. The worst of these would occur in one of the biggest and most mixed cities in the region, Damascus. There, the city's Druze and Muslim population had heard of their co-religionists' victory over the Christians in Mount Lebanon and celebrated. The atmosphere had been described by numerous contemporary reports as seething to explode. The conflict in Lebanon had forced Christian families to seek the safety of Damascus, adding to the simmering tensions below the surface. One of the city's most prominent residents met with the Ottoman governor of the region and warned him of the rising drama in Damascus. The Ottomans did not take him seriously enough. The resident in question was Emir Abdul Qadir. Now in exile, he was an Algerian military, spiritual and political leader who resisted France for 17 years despite terrible odds in the 1830s and 40s. He had gained renown for the honorable conduct of his resistance, such as the good treatment he afforded enemy prisoners. Using his influence as a Muslim hero that resisted European imperialism, Abdul Qadir, along with other Muslim notables, tried to defuse the situation. But it was too late for cool heads to prevail. On July 8th, a group of Muslim boys vandalized property in the Christian quarter. When the authorities punished them, an angry Muslim crowd gathered and attacked the Ottoman officials. Emir Abdul Qadir tried to stop the violence. His 1,000-strong contingent of Algerian followers were armed and instructed by their emir to protect the Christians of the city. He ordered his men to block the entry to the Christian quarter, but was overwhelmed by a massive mob that he did not want to risk fighting. He did, however, rescue hundreds, if not thousands, of Christians by sheltering them in his opulent residence that was afforded by the generous pension given to him by the French state. Fortifying his Damascus mansion, the rioters did not wish to test the battle-proven Algerian. Over the course of the next week or so, violent mobs of Muslims and Druze laid waste to the Christian quarter of the city. By the time the revolt died down on July 17th, some 10,000 Christians had been killed and their part of the city had been destroyed. Emir Abdul Qadir's fame rose to celebrity-like levels, inducing medals of honor from various European countries. The 1860 Syrian civil war had come to an end, but the conflict between the different religions and ethnicities was far from over. In the aftermath, there was international outcry thanks to the coverage it got by European newspapers. France regarded itself as the protectors of the Maronites, so it was especially outraged by the conflict. A multinational force of up to 12,000 British, Russian, Austrian, Prussian and French soldiers was sent to the Levant to maintain peace. The Europeans pressured the Ottoman Sultan diplomatically to do more to maintain order within his realm and protect Christian minorities better. In response, the Ottomans replaced the old subdivision of the region with the Mount Lebanon Mutasarrifiyat, which was to be autonomous with a Christian leader. The next few decades would see the rapid growth of a French sphere of influence in Syria. The Mutasarrifiyat would become an essential step in the realization of a Lebanese national consciousness and helped pave the way for an independent Lebanon to be created in the 20th century. But the hostility between Lebanon's different groups was not reduced by its newfound autonomy or political identity. A century after the 1860 conflict, Lebanon would find itself in the throes of one of the deadliest civil wars in 20th century Middle Eastern history that was directly related to unresolved religious and ethnic tensions. These episodes of violent discord as well as economic difficulties in the rural areas forced many Lebanese to immigrate abroad. Their move was facilitated by developments in naval technology, with steamships making journeys far shorter in time and cheaper. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese, mainly Christians, ditched the difficult terrain of the countryside to come to port cities like Beirut. From there, they went mainly in two directions, one being the New World, the USA and various South American countries like Brazil, and the other to nearby Middle Eastern countries. From the latter group, Egypt became the preferred destination. The Ottoman province had been subdued by the British in 1882 and was a hotspot of intellectual, cultural and economic activity. There emerged in Egypt a Lebanese community that was cosmopolitan and influential. This affected Egypt, where the publishing industry was dominated by Syrian and Lebanese migrants. Al-Ahram newspaper, a mainstay of Egyptian journalism for the last 150 years, was actually set up by Salim and Bishara Taqla, Lebanese migrants to Alexandria. In fact, much of the Arab world at the time was experiencing a renaissance, now known as the Nahda. This was a cultural movement intent on charting a new course for the Arab world within modernity. From it sprung most of the ideologies that would come to dominate 20th century Middle East: nationalism, secularism, and even Islamism. Lebanese thinkers were very well represented within the Nahda: Ibrahim al-Yazigi, Georgi al-Zaidan, Butrus al-Bustani, and Rashid Ridha, to name a few. Those that had migrated to the Americas developed their own literary movement, known as the Mahjar, with Khalil Gibran being the most famous of the Mahjari writers. The goal was to sustain the Arabness of the migrants in their new settings. With the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the introduction of nationalism from Europe being supported by a rising printing press, ideas around identity were becoming increasingly important for both the diaspora and those living within Lebanon. Much of this development was fueled by an explosion in literacy rates. Schools began emerging in villages across the Mutasarrifiyat. Those that wanted to pursue a higher education had ample opportunity in major cities like Beirut, where Western Christian missionaries sought to spread their religious influence by establishing numerous schools that are still the leading academic institutions inside the country, with the American University of Beirut and St. Joseph University being the best examples. In the second half of the 19th century, Beirut was one of the fastest growing cities in the world. Its cultural development went hand in hand with its economic growth, as the port city became a hub for international trade. In 1888, the city's importance was recognized by Ottoman authorities when it was promoted to a vilayat, the first level administrative division. By the turn of the 20th century, Beirut was handling up to 10% of international trade within the Ottoman Empire. Chief amongst its exports was silk, which would be transported to Europe, mainly France. In addition to its naval links with the rest of the world, Lebanon's interconnectivity was aided by a French-built railway that linked Beirut to Damascus. Whilst Beirut boomed, Mount Lebanon was characterized during the Mutasarrifiyat era by a rural exodus. In this period, it is estimated that up to a quarter of the population left the area to seek a better life elsewhere. Migration became such a big deal that by the beginning of World War I, money being sent by the diaspora to Mount Lebanon became one of its main sources of income. Most left the country, but many relocated to nearby coastal cities, thereby having a massive impact on the demographics of the country. For instance, Maronites who left Mount Lebanon for Beirut and established themselves were able to ascertain more power, something that would become crucial once the French moved in after World War I. In 1914, Europe broke out into war. The Ottomans joined the Germans to fight against the British, French, and Russians. Considering Mount Lebanon and cities like Beirut had attracted a lot of European attention in recent decades, the Ottoman army moved in to assert their authority over the region. Jamal Pasha, one of the three pashas that ruled the Ottoman Empire during World War I, was sent by the government to the Levant to coordinate Ottoman efforts against the British in Egypt. Conscription and Turkification policies were introduced, whilst the basic law of the Mutasarrifiyat was disregarded, making Jamal Pasha a hugely unpopular figure amongst the Lebanese and Syrians, who referred to him as As-Safa, the bloodshedder. To confound matters even further, various factors converged in 1915 to cause the Great Famine of Mount Lebanon. Hundreds of thousands died from starvation as the Allies blockaded the Eastern Mediterranean in order to weaken the Ottoman economy, whilst a swarm of locusts demolished what little crops remained. The famine-like conditions soon led to epidemics, as the lack of nutrition and hygiene encouraged the spread of diseases such as dysentery and typhoid. Mount Lebanon's population was cut down in half by what the Lebanese refer to as the kafno. These conditions would remain until the war ended in 1918. By the end of summer 1918, the British forces were advancing from Egypt into Palestine, and so the Ottomans retreated from Mount Lebanon. The flag of Sharif Hussein's Arab revolt was hoisted in Lebanese cities in October 1918. But these celebrations were cut short just a few days later when the British and French landed in Beirut and dissolved the Arab government. In the aftermath of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, Lebanon and Syria came under the mandate of the French. Sharif Hussein's son, Faisal, was quickly expelled from Syria, although the British would make him king of Iraq. Greater Lebanon was established, with Mount Lebanon constituting the bulk of its territory, as well as the incorporation of key cities such as Beirut, Tripoli, and Sidon. France's rationale for Greater Lebanon was for it to serve as a safe haven for Lebanese Christians, but the inclusion of some of the coastal cities made the demographic makeup a lot more complicated, as these cities often had large Muslim populations. The French mandate's favouring of the Maronites was an open secret, and a census carried out in 1932 put the Christians at a narrow 51% majority. And this has been used as the bedrock of a political system that has given the Christians a greater say in running the affairs of the country. The Christian ascendancy and the results of the 1932 census were enshrined in the National Pact of 1943, an unwritten agreement between Muslim and Christian leaders which determined what the political structure of Lebanon would look like. Here are some of the key points of the agreement. The president and commander of the armed forces were both to be Maronites. The prime minister was to be a Sunni. The speaker of parliament was to be a Shia. The deputy speaker of parliament and deputy prime minister was to be a Greek Orthodox Christian. The chief of the general staff of the armed forces was to be a Druze. And within parliament there would always be a ratio of 6-5 in favor of the Christians to Muslims. In 1943, Lebanon gained independence from the French. Although it initially kept the peace, the fact that this political model was based off a census meant that if there was a shift in demographics, it could open the door for future turbulence. And that's exactly what would happen. This is where the Palestinians come in. In the aftermath of Israel's creation and the subsequent Arab-Israeli War in 1948, Palestinians experienced something that they refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe, whereby almost 750,000 of them were forced to become refugees in the surrounding Arab countries. Lebanon inherited 100,000 Palestinian refugees in this period, mostly residing in the south of the country and in large coastal cities such as Sidon. Naturally, many critics domestically felt that the arrival of the largely Sunni Palestinians would upset the delicate sectarian balance, thus resulting in their exclusion from fully integrating with Lebanese society, being left alone in their refugee camps. In 1952, the Maronite Kamil Shamoun became president. He was notable for his unbridled support of the United States, an unpopular position in a region where Jamal Abdel Nasser's brand of Arab socialism was gospel. Discontent grew, especially in Muslim and Druze circles, who not only had great sympathy with pan-Arab ideas, but felt underrepresented in the government. When pro-Shamoun troops fired on a group of protesters in May 1957, killing 7 and injuring 73, tensions were ignited. The following month, pro-Shamoun candidates won an overwhelming majority in parliamentary elections, an event that the opposition publicly denounced as fraudulent. Nasser took note of the increasing discontent with a pro-American regime in Egypt's neighborhood and began materially and diplomatically supporting anti-Shamoun factions. The following year, Egypt and Syria united and formed the United Arab Republic, which emboldened pro-Nasserists in Lebanon. Demonstrations kicked off again and only grew bigger. Finally, the straw that broke the camel's back took place in May 1958, when a newspaper editor critical of Shamoun's government was assassinated. anti-government and anti-American riots broke out, and Syria began arming militants. Many countries accused Nasser of provoking sectarian conflict, and Shamroon felt the rope tightening around his neck. Sandwiched between a hostile union, he called on the Americans for help. After President Eisenhower authorized it, US Marines were deployed in Lebanon to ensure the Americans did not lose a valuable ally in the region. The troops withdrew by October the same year, and as a compromise between the two sides, the slightly more moderate Fuad Shihab was appointed president. Civil war was narrowly avoided for the time being. It is worth noting that this crisis took two forms: that of a proxy war between capitalists and socialists, typical of the Cold War, and a sectarian conflict between Christians and Muslims within Lebanon. The following decade was one of calm and prosperity. Aside from the political stability, Beirut's large banking sector, strategic location, and sprawling port made it the financial capital of the region. Western countries and wealthy Persian Gulf states invested, earning Beirut the nickname the Paris of the Middle East. Tourism became an important part of its economy. For a time, things were going smoothly in Lebanon. But in such a volatile part of the world, disputes in other countries tended to trickle over. In June 1967, Israel would score one of the most stunning military victories in modern warfare against the combined forces of Syria, Egypt, and Jordan. In the space of 6 days, they neutralized their foes and moved in to take control of what was left of Palestinian territory. Israeli incursions into the West Bank and Gaza forced even more refugees to flee to surrounding countries. But perhaps the most important side effect of this emphatic victory was that it emboldened independent Palestinian resistance groups to take matters into their own hands and rely less on fellow Arab states to fight on their behalf. Already the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, had been created as an umbrella organization to synchronize the activities of various militant groups. Under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, the PLO would take center stage in the fight against Israel, receiving global attention for their daring raids on Israeli targets. From their headquarters in Jordan, the PLO enjoyed a surge of unprecedented popularity as recruitment for their cause increased massively. The group gained such momentum that by 1970, King Hussein of Jordan felt his position and authority were under attack by the PLO, who some have described as having created a state within a state in Jordan. So King Hussein forced the Palestinian resistance movement out of his country in events that are now known as Black September in 1970. Subsequently, the PLO moved their base to Lebanon. An armed and foreign force was concerning to many Lebanese, particularly the Maronites, but many Lebanese Sunni Muslims welcomed the guerrillas, who they saw as equalizing the balance of power that had so long been tipped in favor of the Christians. Even prior to 1970, the PLO had established itself in southern Lebanon, frequently conducting raids into northern Israel. In 1969, Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser brokered a deal between the PLO and the Lebanese army which would allow Palestinian guerrillas a great deal of freedom to use their numerous refugee camps as bases from which they could attack Israel. South Lebanon was nicknamed Fatah Land because of Arafat's organization, Fatah. Once again, the PLO would create a sort of state within a state. If the demographic shifts that took place after hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees moved in were not enough, there were also sharp ideological differences within Lebanon too. Many Muslims inside the country were sympathetic to Jamal Abdel Nasser's brand of Arab nationalism, which combined pan-Arabist ideas with socialist inclinations and were antagonistic to the West. The Lebanese Christian groups, on the other hand, were much more resistant to this and chose to focus on Lebanon itself and aligning themselves with the West. Maronite political organizations favored a more right-wing approach to politics. The major Maronite political party, the Kataib, was formed by Pierre Gemayel in the 1930s, and it was modeled on the Italian and Spanish fascist parties. So whilst the Muslims felt much more inclined to get involved in affairs that related to Arabs, such as the Palestinian cause, the Christian groups wanted to avoid it. The presence of the PLO brought to the surface ideological and sectarian conflicts that had previously been swept under the rug. When observing the start of the Lebanese civil war, historians tend to point out one or two specific incidents as beginning the conflict. But in reality, it was the result of an accumulation of tensions. One key incident that can be identified within the sequence of these events took place in early 1975. Camille Chamroun, now ex-president of Lebanon and leader of the Maronite National Liberal Party, had business interests in relation to fishing. He wanted to monopolize fishing off the coast of Sidon, a large and predominantly Sunni port city in the south of Lebanon. The unionized local fishermen, led by former mayor Maruf Saad, opposed this and led a small demonstration in the city. Whilst rallying, Saad was shot and killed by a sniper. Exact details have not been confirmed, but the general consensus at the time was that the killer was a soldier in the Lebanese army. His funeral was attended by thousands, both Muslim Lebanese and the many Palestinians living in the city. Led in part by the PLO, the funeral evolved into a massive demonstration, and protests, sometimes violent, erupted across the country. More than a dozen were killed by state security forces. The circumstances for a conflict were brewing, and it became clear that Lebanon was in a state of civil war on April 13, 1975. At a church in East Beirut, a Maronite family was having a baptism ceremony, and many notable figures, most importantly Pierre Gemayel, were attending. As everyone was waiting outside of the church, gunmen fired out of a truck decorated with the symbolism of a leftist Palestinian group. 4 people were killed, but the militias missed Pierre. Still, Gemayel's armed faction, the Kataib, were outraged at the audacity of such an attempt. And so that day, the Kataib set up checkpoints throughout the city. When they came across a group of civilians returning from a pro-PLO political rally in a bus, they fired on it and killed more than 20 passengers, claiming that these were PLO guerrillas. As a result, armed clashes began. In the years following, the various militia groups rendered the Lebanese military ineffective. Christians were expelled en masse from West Beirut as the PLO and their allies, ranging from communists to Shia Islamists, made rapid gains. In December of that year, following the assassination of 4 of its members by a group of Muslims, the Kataib set up checkpoints once again. Lebanese ID cards stated religion on them, which meant that the Kataib could kill on a sectarian basis. Anywhere from 200 to 600 Muslims and Druze were killed that day, which came to be known as Black Saturday. The following year, another massacre was committed by the Kataib in the predominantly Palestinian neighborhood of Karantina. Roughly 1,000 people were killed. As vengeance, the PLO violated and slaughtered hundreds of Christians in Damour in brutal fashion. Lebanon, once a symbol of prosperity, was now spiraling into revolt and unchecked violence. The conflict would prove to be one of the most complicated in modern Middle Eastern history, with alliances constantly shifting and the war going through various phases. But at least in the early phase of the war, the combatant militia groups were largely divided between the Maronite-dominated Lebanese Front and the Lebanese National Movement that incorporated leftist, Palestinian, Shia, Sunni and Druze organizations. To confound matters even further, the conflict saw a number of foreign countries get involved. Besides the obvious involvement of the USA and the USSR within the context of the Cold War, neighboring Syria invaded in 1976 under the guise of an Arab peacekeeping mission. Initially intervening on the side of the Maronite Christians, Syrian support would constantly shift between the different militia groups. The PLO cemented their hold over the south, parts of Beirut, and the Palestinian refugee camps. From South Lebanon, they frequently launched attacks on Israel, which ultimately led to a number of military reprisals. The first of these came in 1978, when the Israeli army rolled into southern Lebanon to neutralize the threat of Fedayeen attacks. Although Israel would withdraw later that same year, they left behind a defensive buffer zone that they entrusted to their Christian allies, the South Lebanon Army. The Israeli involvement in the war as a response to Palestinian attacks further complicated Lebanon's civil war. 4 years later, Israel would invade again. This time, they wanted a permanent solution to PLO attacks. So they allied themselves with the Christian Lebanese Front and besieged Beirut. Seeing themselves surrounded and at the prey of aerial attacks, the PLO were given a way out under the protection of international peacekeepers as they accepted defeat and relocated their headquarters to Tunisia. The Lebanese civil war would drag on throughout the 1980s and finally came to an end in 1990. After its conclusion in 1990, an interesting narrative has arisen in certain circles that shifts the blame for the Lebanese civil war to the Palestinians, particularly the militant groups committed to resisting Israel. To put the blame of starting the civil war squarely on the shoulders of the Palestinian resistance movement would be very unfair and not reflective of historical accuracy. In truth, anything as big and complex as a civil war is always going to have multiple causes. In the case of Lebanon, I think it's fair to say that the largest contributory factor for its civil war was its own political system. Even though its political model is largely based on the view that there was a slim majority of Christians in the country, the last time an official national census was conducted was in 1932. Since then, the topic has become a highly sensitive one, making it difficult to know with certainty Lebanon's demography. Nevertheless, it's reasonable to assume that the Muslims now have a majority. This brings forward very difficult questions that Lebanon will have to address. Namely, if its original political system was formed with demography in mind, does that mean it's time to change the country's constitution? It's not too difficult to see why a multi-confessional arrangement would be attractive as a power-sharing agreement in a diverse place like Lebanon. However, it stands to reason that that kind of system would always be fragile in the face of change. If everything stayed the same, then perhaps it could work. But the problem is, things always change, especially in a pivotal region like the Middle East. The PLO certainly precipitated the onset of hostilities in the 1970s, with their apparent ability to build a state-like infrastructure outside the remit of the Lebanese national government, and their constant attacks on Israel also had wider ramifications that affected Lebanon as a whole when the Israelis invaded the country. Nevertheless, if we want to figure out why the Lebanese civil war even happened in the first place, perhaps it might be better to look at the very makeup of Lebanon's political model than to point the finger at a specific antagonist. One of the biggest side effects of the Lebanese civil war, more specifically the Israeli invasion of 1982, was the creation of the Shia militant group turned political party Hezbollah. From its establishment as a state in 1943, Lebanon's Shia community has been the most marginalized of the country's various groups. Lebanon's last official census in 1932 reported that Shias made up around 19% of the population, but by the 1980s, this figure was estimated by unofficial sources to have risen to 30%. Mainly congregating in the south as well as the Bekaa Valley in the east, the Shia community naturally became politicized with the advent of the Lebanese Civil War in the 1970s. Much of this was pioneered by the Amal movement that was led by Musa al-Sadr. One interesting thing to note is the international links that the Lebanese Shia have with the wider region. Al-Sadr, for example, was born in Iran where he spent 25 years before studying in Iraq for a number of years. This will help to understand why Hezbollah's current close links with Iran is such a natural relationship. Hezbollah began in 1982 as a loose amalgamation of smaller Shia groups centered in the Bekaa Valley. In its early days, Hezbollah operated as an umbrella movement for Shia militias that shared strategic goals. Much of its early membership, including its two founders, Abbas al-Musawi and Subi al-Tufayli, had come from disgruntled members of Amal. Both men had studied in Najaf at the same time as Ayatollah Khomeini was exiled there. Revolutionary Shiism at the time was saturated with an emphasis on resistance to persecution and martyrdom. Subsequently, the ideological outlooks of both the Islamic Republic of Iran and Hezbollah come from the same root of thinking. This helps to contextualize why the two have such close links today. It's not because Hezbollah is a puppet of Iran's and has little sovereignty, rather, they share the same origin and strategic goals, creating some sort of an intuitive understanding between the two. Hezbollah was formally announced to the world in 1985, but many had already become familiar with the group by this point. The Islamic Jihad Organization, or IJO, had carried out high-profile attacks, namely the 1983 bombing of the US Embassy and subsequent attacks on the US and French barracks later that year, both in Beirut. Also in the 1980s, there was a hostage crisis where over 100 foreign targets were abducted. The IJO was later assimilated within Hezbollah, and its leader, Imad Mughniya, would eventually become Hezbollah's chief of military affairs. And in the case of the kidnappings, although Hezbollah publicly denied involvement, it is widely believed to have been behind them, largely because the IJO was instrumental in many of these kidnappings. Hezbollah's main aim from the start revolved around expelling foreign forces from Lebanon. This applied chiefly to two countries, America and Israel. The former had intervened along with a number of other European countries to form the MNF in 1982, which was created in the first place as a reaction to Israel's invasion of Lebanon that year. By 1984, the MNF were forced out of the country. The Israelis also pulled out of Beirut and much of Lebanon by 1985, but continued to occupy southern Lebanon in the aim of establishing a security zone that would protect its northern frontier. This occupation was essentially how Hezbollah made its name. For the next 15 years, it fought against the Israeli army and its Christian militia proxy, the South Lebanon Army. In addition, the militant group also fought against other Lebanese factions. From 1985 until 1988, Hezbollah fought on the side of the Palestinian Liberation Organization against Amal in what is referred to as the War of the Camps. In this sub-conflict, Hezbollah was pitted against its future ally Syria, who actually played a prominent role in the Lebanese civil war, controlling much of the eastern part of the country, including the Bekaa Valley where Hezbollah was first formed. In the final years of the civil war, Hezbollah and Amal went to war again in what is now known as the War of Brothers. But this ended in 1990 and the two groups reconciled under the auspices of their respective sponsors, Syria and Iran, two countries who were already building budding relations with each other starting in the 1980s. The group etched a name for itself during the civil war through its fighters' determination and discipline on the battlefield. Even at this early stage, Hezbollah was aided by Iran, with the IRGC sending advisors to the Bekaa Valley to train and equip the group. This alliance was a no-brainer, both being 12 Shias and both belonged to an ideological background that was rooted in the Shia seminaries of Iraq and Iran. Hezbollah's current dominance cannot be understood without recognizing its close ties with the Ayatollah's regime in Iran. By the end of the 1980s, the Lebanese civil war was drawing to a conclusion. The Taif Agreement of 1989 signaled the beginning of the end, with all fighting ceasing by January 1991. The various factions and militias agreed to put down their arms as Lebanon finally embraced peace. Only one group defiantly refused to disarm, Hezbollah. No doubt the Iranians, through their links with Syria, had influence on allowing the group to maintain its arsenal. Hafez al-Assad's regime in Syria would continue to dominate Lebanon's internal affairs until the Cedar Revolution kicked them out in 2005. As far as Hezbollah was concerned, its struggle was not over. Throughout the 1990s, it was engaged in guerrilla warfare against the Israelis and their proxy, the Christian SLA. Then, early in 1992, the group was dealt a serious blow when their leader al-Musawi was assassinated along with his wife and children by the IDF. He was to be succeeded by Hassan Nasrallah, the man in charge until today. In retaliation, the IJO attacked the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, Argentina the next month. 2 years later, Argentina was once again the site of a massive attack. The AMIA bombing targeted a Jewish community center. Despite Hezbollah denying responsibility, Argentina suspect the group carried it out with Iranian supervision and formally charged Imad Mughniya for his involvement in both those attacks. 1992 marked a new chapter in the history of Hezbollah, as it announced it would be participating in that year's general elections. This decision caused a schism in the group, as its one-time Secretary General, Subi al-Tufayli, criticized it as a distraction from its armed struggle against Israel. This did little to slow it down, as the group's political wing won 8 seats in parliament. Hezbollah has since then avowed to uphold religious freedoms inside the country and opened dialogue with Christian groups shortly after 1992. Politically, it grew from strength to strength. By the time of the 2000 elections, its electoral alliance with Amal clinched 20 seats in the 128-member Lebanese parliament. This improved political standing largely came from Israel finally withdrawing from South Lebanon in that year. Millions of people around the Arab world, used to seeing Israel steamroll its opponents, celebrated the withdrawal in 2000. Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah were catapulted to new levels of fame, with the victory being framed as the first time Israel unilaterally withdrew from Arab territory without a peace treaty or concessions. But what made Hezbollah such a formidable force on the political scene was its ambition and confidence. In addition to their military exploits against Israel, Hezbollah has gained much popularity nationwide through the social services it provides. As mentioned before, Lebanon's Shias have historically been neglected by Beirut. Therefore, Hezbollah filled this vacuum by setting up schools, hospitals, and agricultural aid, all done in an organized manner through a number of established institutions. To lighten the burden of the Lebanese civil war and its own struggle against Israel, the group has even engaged in building houses. These efforts inevitably help Hezbollah to win the hearts and minds of the Lebanese people. As a result of this, it's no wonder the group's infrastructure has been described by some analysts as quasi-state-like. Early in 2006, Hassan Nasrallah signed an alliance with Michel Aoun, the leader of the Free Patriotic Movement, or the FPM. The Mar-Mikhael Agreement still continues to shape Lebanese politics until today. Despite its political activity, Hezbollah has not forgotten its military roots. It continued to defy calls to put down its weapons, announcing that its struggle against Israel was not over, citing Israeli occupation of the Shibaa farms as the reason. The conflict over this tiny strip of land on the Lebanese-Syrian border would culminate in the 2006 Lebanon War. This month-long conflict saw Israel once again launch a ground invasion into southern Lebanon, whilst its fighter jets bombarded Hezbollah and civilian infrastructure targets. Hezbollah retaliated by launching rockets into northern Israel and by engaging the IDF in guerrilla warfare. The UN stepped in to offer a resolution that was quickly accepted by both parties. Israel was to withdraw, the Lebanese armed forces were supposed to exert their authority over southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah was supposed to disarm. Considering Hezbollah remained dominant in the south of the country and has not disarmed, the conflict was once again interpreted as a victory for the group by many in the Middle East. By 2008, Hezbollah was able to exert a lot of influence on the domestic scene. That year, Lebanon experienced a wave of protests that began in late 2006. Hezbollah, along with Amal and the Christian FPM, led these protests which were aimed at curbing the country's economic woes, as well as a greater say for the group and its allies. In May 2008, the upheaval turned violent when the government decided to shut down Hezbollah's telecommunication network. Hassan Nasrallah called this an act of war, and the group responded by forcefully seizing control of pro-government neighborhoods in Beirut, and small battles broke out. Lebanon narrowly avoided conflict thanks to the intervention of the Arab League. A week later, the Doha Agreement was signed by all parties in Qatar. Since then, Hezbollah's military capability has seen a dramatic improvement. This is largely thanks to Iran's equipment and money, which really ramped up post-2000. The group's improved military capacity was on full display during the 2006 war, as it launched around 4,000 rockets into Israel and used drone technology. In the years since, under the supervision of Iran's Quds force, Hezbollah's military capacity has reached new levels, boasting an arsenal of up to 150,000 rockets, many with long-range capabilities. Apart from some like the Russian-made Katyusha rockets, most of these weapons were Iranian-made. Some sources estimate that by now, Iran supports Hezbollah with $700 million annually. To put it into context, Hassan Nasrallah has gone on record to state Hezbollah's budget, everything it eats and drinks, its weapons and rockets, comes from the Islamic Republic of Iran. All these material gains were honed and aided by experience on the battlefields of the Syrian civil war. Hezbollah's decision to fight on the side of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, a close ally of Tehran, appalled many inside Lebanon. The group had championed itself as a resistance movement that fought against injustice, but now seemed to serve the cause of tyranny. For Hezbollah, they almost had no choice. Iran was deeply invested in upholding Assad's regime, which was a vital conduit of arms for the group. The combat experience gained from the conflict was very helpful for Hezbollah. By serving mainly as frontline advisors, they gained greater knowledge on military structure and organization. They would have also gained exposure to sophisticated Russian military doctrine, as the Russians were also in Syria trying to prop up Assad's regime. All this military capability and experience have experts questioning which is a more potent military force, the Lebanese army or Hezbollah. Both internally and externally, Hezbollah are well positioned to take advantage of current developments in the region. It is currently part of the March 8th alliance, which holds 16 of the 24 cabinet positions, at a time when Lebanon is going through massive socio-economic upheaval. More importantly, with regional tensions flaring, Iran's axis of resistance is putting the pressure on Israel. Within the last year, the three Iranian-backed groups, Hamas in Palestine, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, have all stepped up their attacks on Israel. If a conflict breaks out between Iran and Israel, Hezbollah will undoubtedly play a key role in how that war develops.
Thank you guys for watching, and a special thank you goes out to my Patreons for continuing to support me financially. If you want to do so, click the link in the end screen or in the description to this video, and I would appreciate it a lot. Whatever contribution you can make, that would be awesome. Until next time, peace.